You are listening to The Evidence Locker. Our cases have been researched using open source and archive materials. It deals with true crimes and real people. Some parts are graphic in nature, and listener discretion is advised. Each episode is produced with the utmost respect to the victims, their families, and loved ones. On a mild late summer day in Dublin, in August 2012, the vibe in the city center was electric. The people flocked to the docklands to welcome 40 vessels that had been sailing around Europe's ports since the beginning of July, in a regatta called the Tall Ships Races. In 2012, the festival everyone simply called Tall Ships drew more than 1 million visitors. Dubliners made the most of the opportunity to showcase their city. It was a 3-day event with festivities, including live music and fun for the family. Street performers kept the crowds entertained, and food vendors made sure everyone was fed. Locals volunteered to work at the event, welcoming ship crews and supporting logistics as big crowds moved to the waterside to appreciate the beautiful vessels from all over the world. A volunteer manager grew concerned when one of the most enthusiastic volunteers, a childcare worker by the name of Elaine O'Hara, did not show up. 36-year-old Elaine had some mental health challenges, and her father Frank was notified about her absence. No one could reach Elaine on her cell phone. Frank went to her apartment, but no one answered the door. Expecting the worst, he let himself in and called for her, but she wasn't there. Elaine's cell phone was still there, which was unusual, as she always seemed to be on her phone texting or playing games. Her car was gone, so it looked like she only intended to leave for a short while, perhaps just to get something from a convenience store. But when Elaine was still missing the next morning, Frank knew something wasn't right. It would be a year before Frank knew what happened to his daughter on that August day. The story of Elaine O'Hara caused a sensation, one that shook the people of Ireland to their very core. Elaine O'Hara was born on the 17th of March in Dublin, Ireland, to parents Frank and Eileen. Elaine had a rocky childhood, and she had many physical and mental health issues. She suffered from asthma, diabetes, and was also dyslexic. As she reached her teens, Elaine was also diagnosed with depression and borderline personality disorder. She attended St. Joseph of Cluny School and was bullied, adding fuel to the fire of her already fragile state. In her mid-teens, Elaine resorted to self-harm. Her parents were supportive of her and were aware of her battles. But sadly, Elaine's internal struggles only got worse. At the age of 16, she attempted suicide. Her mother found her with slashed wrists in the bathroom, but she was able to save her. Both Eileen and Frank took their daughter's problems to heart and made sure that she received the necessary counseling. With the love and support of her parents, Elaine managed to finish school and further her education in childcare. In 2001, she took a job as a childcare assistant at the elementary school where her mother worked. It was the ideal situation. Elaine moved towards independent adulthood, but her mom was there to keep an eye on her. They had a close and trusting relationship. Eileen meant the world to Elaine. Sadly, Eileen was diagnosed with cancer and passed away in 2002. This was a significant setback for Elaine. She grieved deeply and spent a lot of time at home with her dad. Over the course of a couple of years, she managed to pick up the pieces. In 2005, she moved out of the family home in Killakee to an apartment in Blackrock. Her dad Frank always watched over Elaine and helped her out financially from time to time. Elaine still battled with her mental health issues, but she always knew the signs and at which point to look for help when she needed it. Despite this, she managed to keep herself going. She had aspirations of becoming a Montessori teacher and took night classes in the town of Dunleary. From Blackrock, Elaine moved to an affordable housing scheme apartment in Stepaside. She worked as an assistant in childcare at Ballybrack and also had a part-time job at a local news agency in Blackrock. In the last week of August 2012, Frank grew concerned when he could not get a hold of his daughter. Typically, he was in daily contact with Elaine, but he had not heard from her in 2 days. He called her friends and her co-workers, but they had not seen or heard from Elaine either. On Friday, the 24th of August, he reported her missing. Because of Elaine's mental health problems, Frank was concerned that she had had a setback. In the time leading up to her disappearance, she booked herself into St. Elstonbury, a private mental health facility. Elaine received treatment for 3 weeks, and when she was released, she was much better. When she went home on August 22nd, she was upbeat and excited to resume her everyday life. Frank picked her up from the clinic, and together, they went straight to her mother's grave, a place dear to both of them. It was a ritual to show Eileen that they were doing okay. They took flowers and talked to her, held on to each other as they longed for her. But this was not a day for tears. Elaine had volunteered to work at the Tall Ships Races Festival as a guide the following day. It was the highlight of Elaine's year. She was looking forward to it and relieved that she was out of the hospital so she can go. But Elaine never showed up for her shift as a volunteer. Organizers at the Tall Ships Races were surprised and contacted Frank to ask if he knew where she was. Frank tried calling her, but she did not pick up the phone. Concerned, he let himself into her apartment. Elaine wasn't there, and she had left her cell phone at home too. It was unusual, but Frank thought perhaps she had the dates mixed up, as she had been in the hospital for a while. Maybe she was visiting a friend. Frank kept calling into the night, hoping Elaine was back home. When there was no answer the next morning, he went back to her apartment with a friend. It was clear that Elaine had not been home since he had been there the day before. He also noticed her handbag. That's when he knew something was terribly wrong. Elaine would not have intended to go far without her purse or her phone. Where could she have gone without money or credit cards? Frank's friend went into Elaine's room and found a latex bondage suit and mask in the laundry basket. She decided not to tell Frank about it, as the insinuation that his daughter was into BDSM would have unsettled the man who was already deeply worried. She did not think it was relevant to Elaine's disappearance and left it at that. Frank decided to visit his wife's grave as he thought Elaine could have gone there. When he arrived, he saw her car in the parking lot and was relieved. Convinced that everything was about to be cleared up, he went over to her car. But there was still no sign of Elaine. Inside the car, Frank noticed something strange. There was a phone charger for a Nokia, but Elaine owned an iPhone. The phone that he found in her apartment. This was when Frank notified police. The initial assumption was that something happened to her at the Tall Ships Races, or perhaps on her way there. Garda took immediate action and tried to trace Elaine's movements from where she was last seen. They looked at CCTV footage from the apartment building where she lived and saw that she arrived home at 4:29 p.m. on August 22nd, the same day she was released from the hospital after she had visited her mother's grave with her dad. The footage showed Elaine then leaving her home again at 5:05 p.m., with a cell phone in her hand. She was wearing a blue hoodie and navy tracksuit pants. This was strange, as she had told her dad that she planned on having a night in, as the following day at the Tall Ships was going to be a long one. Police and searchers went to Shanganagh Park, where Elaine's car was found. The phone in her hand looked like a Nokia, which would explain the charger in her car. It looked like Elaine drove herself to the park, but why? Did she want to visit her mother's grave once more? Shanganagh Park is a large wooded area where people go for recreation, so perhaps she simply went for a walk and perhaps injured herself. Police showed Elaine's photo to people visiting the park. A jogger recognized her and said that he saw her on Wednesday, the 22nd of August. He noted that Elaine asked him if he knew where the footbridge crossing the railway was. He didn't. He thought that she was rude when she left without saying anything else. She looked upset, distraught even, and she kept an eye on the screen of her phone while she walked off. Another witness recalled a woman fitting Elaine's description crying loudly at a graveside, but could not say for sure if the woman was, in fact, Elaine or not. Not far from the location where Elaine spoke to the jogger was a beach. Police assumed that Elaine visited her mother's grave and, consumed by grief, went to the beach and ended her own life by walking into the ocean. They scoured the beach, but again, there was no trace of Elaine. We'll take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. Every now and again, something comes along that hits the sweet spot. June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game set in a sprawling mansion in the roaring 20s. If you like Gatsby or Agatha Christie, you'll know what I'm talking about. The scene is set. June arrives home after her sister and brother-in-law have been found shot dead in their home. Police have ruled it a murder-suicide, concluding that after a couple of drinks they got into an argument after which Harry shot Claire, then pulled the revolver on himself. June and her niece Virginia decide to work their way through the family estate, from the crime scene to the parlor and Harry's secret office at the gatehouse, hoping to find evidence to support their theory that Claire and Harry were actually murdered. If you play June's Journey, your objective is to find hidden objects within the various scenes. Decorating the estate at Orchid Island gives you credit so you can advance through the levels. Playing June's Journey is a total escape into the vintage world where you'd expect Miss Marple to pop up at any second. It's super relaxing to play and satisfying to find clues to help you solve the case. I became so engrossed that I wanted to see the scenes on a bigger screen. June's Journey is not only for mobile devices, you can also play on your desktop by downloading the game from Amazon or Facebook. To join more than 3 million murder mystery enthusiasts and puzzle solvers around the globe, download June's Journey for free from the App Store or Google Play by clicking the link in the show notes. Now, back to today's episode. Time went on, and there was no new information about Elaine's whereabouts. Frank was devastated as he suspected his daughter had committed suicide. But without her remains, there was a slight chance that she was still alive. Perhaps she had suffered a psychotic break and didn't know how to make her way home. Just over a year after Elaine went missing, dog trader Macaulay Vernier walked dogs near the Killakee foothills of the Dublin mountains. She had permission from the owner of the property to take her dogs for a walk there. While she was walking along a wooded trail, her dog disappeared and came back with bones. He dropped them and then ran back into the woods, returning with another bone. This went on for a couple of days, with Magully's dog fetching bones of varying shapes and sizes. She assumed the bones were animal remains and moved along. But one day, the same dog brought another bone, this time with clothing on it. Macaulay felt uneasy and wondered for the first time if the remains could be human. She called the owner of the property, Frank Doyle, and they investigated together. In a clearing, they found scattered bones, a human rib cage, and a jawbone. At the scene, they also discovered blue tracksuit pants with a shoe still inside. They immediately contacted law enforcement. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Elaine O'Hara. But only 65% of her skeleton was recovered due to the length of time it was exposed to the elements. Police no longer believed it was a suicide, but rather that she had been murdered. This came as a massive shock to Elaine's family and friends, as they had only just begun to come to terms with the idea that she had ended her own life. Around the same time, about 15 to 20 miles from where Elaine's remains are found, William Fegan, his brother, and a friend stopped for a chat on Sally's Bridge at Vatry Reservoirs one afternoon. Usually, the water was about 20 feet deep, but due to the hottest summer in 20 years, the waterline had receded. So on this September day in 2013, the water level was just over 1 foot deep. As he was talking to his brother and their friend, William spotted something strange in the water. A sports bag, perhaps. The men were curious and fished it out. Inside the bag, they found some clothing, a ball gag, leg restraints, and handcuffs. The men laughed at it like it was a remnant from some sort of bachelor party or something, and left it there. But William felt it was unusual. He had the nagging sense that it had some significance, so he went back to the bridge the following day. He retrieved the bag and took it to police at Roundwood Garda Station. He told Officer James O'Donoghue exactly where he had found it, and the Garda followed up. James visited the spot where the bag was discovered several times over the next couple of days. He thought that there could be something more out there to explain this unusual discovery. He dug through the murky water and found a set of keys, as well as an inhaler. Then more items came up, similar to those found by William Fegan and his friends. Handcuffs, a leather mask, a chain with a ring on it. Also, a Dunnes Stores loyalty card on a keychain with a name on it. Elaine O'Hara. When following up, Garda learned that Elaine O'Hara's remains were recently found in Killakee. Suddenly, the curious discovery became vital evidence. In this investigation, one of the biggest coincidences is that the evidence and Elaine's remains were discovered a couple of miles apart, only days apart. Also, the fact that James O'Donoghue trusted his gut instinct and went to investigate further proved extremely useful. Investigators went back to the water at Sally's Bridge and fine-combed the area. They found sunglasses, a day pack, as well as a pair of eyeglasses. The number on the frame of the glasses could be linked to Specsavers in Dunleary. Records proved that the glasses belonged to Elaine O'Hara. Among the items found in the water were 2 cell phones. They had been in the water for more than a year, so police did not have much hope of retrieving any information from them. Both phones were Nokia phones that looked like the one Elaine was holding when she left her apartment on Wednesday, the 22nd of August, over a year before. Miraculously, both phones powered on and revealed a multitude of text messages between 2 people. Each phone had only one contact saved to the phone. The one person as MSTR, or master, and the other SLV, slave. Master was clearly in control, and slave, the subservient recipient. The tone of Master's messages was manipulative, and many texts threatened violence. Evidence showed that the two had a long-standing sexual relationship which revolved around bondage and the use of knives. The connection between the two was very intense in 2008, 4 years before Elaine's death. Over time, messages became very dark. It was clear that Master wanted to rape, stab, and kill women for sexual gratification. He wanted Slave to be a part of it. In June 2011, he sent a message saying, "I want to stick my knife in flesh while I am sexually aroused. I would like to stab a girl to death sometime." Another message read, "My urge to rape, stab, or kill is huge. You have to help me to control or satisfy it." These are only 2 of thousands upon thousands of violent messages. Investigators spent hours following the sadomasochistic relationship as it evolved over 4 years. Every time Slave threatened to get out of the relationship, Master would dangle the promise of fathering a child with her. He tried to entice her to help him find someone to kill. A friend said that Elaine had confided in her that she was in a relationship with a married man and that he did not treat her very well. The friend encouraged her to end it, but Elaine did not seem to think that this was an option. By this time, with all evidence collected, it was fair to assume that the person called Slave was Elaine O'Hara. Police grew concerned that there were more victims out there. They managed to trace down the shop where the Nokia cell phones were purchased. The buyer had supplied a false name and an address. Based on the information, they found a man whose name and address were close matches and took him in for questioning. However, he knew absolutely nothing about Elaine O'Hara or the world of BDSM. He also had an alibi for the day Elaine went missing. He was at work the whole time. Investigators then went back to the mountain of messages and tried to find a clue as to Master's real identity. In one conversation, he mentioned the birth of his daughter. He also said what they had named her. Based on the date and the name, police went to all maternity wards in Dublin and were able to get a short list of baby girls born around the time the text was sent. The conversations also revealed that Master had met Slave at her home, and that they had sexual encounters in her bedroom. CCTV footage from Elaine's apartment complex showed multiple visits by a man in his late 30s. They searched her apartment and were able to get a DNA profile from semen in Elaine's bed. Another clue hidden among the texts was that Master mentioned coming 5th in a flying competition. Was he a pilot? They were able to determine that nobody in the greater Dublin area holding a pilot's license had fathered a baby around the stipulated date. Also, pilots did not have flying competitions, so what could he have meant? Was he a gaming enthusiast? The penny dropped. It must have been someone who flew model airplanes. Police called all the flying clubs in the area and asked about someone fitting the description, a married man with a baby daughter who came 5th in a competition 2 years before. On the 20th of September, only a week after Elaine's remains were found, the Garda hit pay dirt. A flying club located near Sally's Bridge where the bag with the BDSM evidence was found. They had a member who fit the description. It was a 41-year-old Dublin architect by the name of Graham Dwyer. This was entirely unexpected. Dwyer was a clean-cut family man, and he certainly did not look like someone harboring the dark secret of a double life. He had no criminal history, but that didn't mean he was innocent. When the investigation found evidence that on the days of text communication between master and slave, the phone used by master was in the same vicinity as Dwyer's home or work, they knew they were onto something. Graham Dwyer was born in Bandon, Cork County, on September 13, 1972, to Sean and Susan Dwyer. He had 3 siblings and a wholesome upbringing. After high school in the 1990s, he moved to Dublin where he studied architecture. His college girlfriend, Emma McShay, fell pregnant, and they had a son together. They didn't get married, but lived together for a while. Emma told police that Graham had confided in her about his fantasy to stab a woman during sex, and often took a kitchen knife into the bedroom and pretended to stab her when they were intimate. Their relationship ended in 1996. Police found another ex-girlfriend, called Sarah Murphy, who said that Graham was always obsessed with knives when it came to sex. Eventually, it weirded her out too much, and she left him. He did not take the breakup well, and started stalking her and making her life a nightmare. In 1997, Graham Dwyer became involved with fellow architect student Gemma Healy, and they got married 5 years later. Things looked like it couldn't get any better for the young up-and-coming architect. His career at A&D Wedgchurt & Partners Architects was soaring, and in 2006, he became a director. Dwyer was involved in many major projects in Ireland and abroad. This position meant that he could afford to buy a house in Foxrock, one of the most sought-after suburbs in Dublin. In 2007, Graham and Gemma moved into their new home at Kerrymount Close. Graham and Gemma were very much the it couple. They were even in the Irish Times together when they joined their architectural talents together in the restoration of an old cottage in Dublin. The couple had 2 children and enjoyed the trimmings of a privileged life. Graham enjoyed his hobbies, flying model airplanes and driving luxury vehicles. Gemma loved sailing. They were on the up and up when the global financial crisis struck in 2008. Gemma was laid off work and Graham took a 50% pay cut. They managed to keep their home, but the glory days were over. After learning about Graham, police staked out the Dwyer family home. They took the opportunity to go through his trash in the hope of finding anything that could yield a DNA sample. Because Graham was such an unlikely suspect, they needed to know if they were onto the right person before exploring the investigation any further. The forensic investigation explored the contents of Elaine's computer. Police found definitive evidence that she was into BDSM. Elaine was active on a website called alt.com under the name HelpMeLearn36/F. Elaine's profile mentioned that she wanted to be a better submissive. On the website, she had contact with someone who called themselves Architect72. Architect72 had a Gmail address, Fetish Boy. The email belonged to Graham Dwyer. In compiling a timeline of the relationship, investigators saw things between them cooled down for a while, but then flared up again in 2011. Graham, using a different cell phone, contacted Elaine on her second cell phone, the one that was only used when communicating with Graham. He was the one who wanted to re-establish communication between them. Messages showed that Elaine pointedly said that she was not into blood anymore, but Graham insisted they meet up again. The relationship was reignited, and they saw each other sporadically, up to the time of Elaine's murder. The text in the days leading up to her death is a haunting foreboding of what Graham had in mind. It read, "If anything happened to you, who knows about me?" On the day Elaine was discharged from hospital, text messages showed that Graham commanded Elaine to go to Shanganagh Park. He told her to leave her iPhone and take the Nokia with her. It was a fine line because their relationship was that of master and slave, a consensual situation where Elaine did as she was told by Graham. But in her emotional state, being under the control of someone like him made her extremely vulnerable. Elaine knew that Graham intended to stab her, but she did not realize he was planning on killing her. He hadn't been with her in more than 3 weeks, and he was ready to make his ultimate fantasy come true. He was teeming with desire. When Elaine arrived, she texted, "Here, sir." He replied with instructions to meet her at the footbridge. When the jogger saw her, Elaine was anxious, scared of disappointing her master. The jogger confirmed that he saw Elaine at 5:40 p.m. using the Map My Run app. Text messages show the route she followed as she said, "I'm lost. I'm in a football field now." In the vast expanse of woodland, it was challenging to find the exact rendezvous point from where she would be at his mercy. Graham Dwyer's plan was to let Elaine walk the distance through the whole park, away from where she had parked her car. Then, he would take her away, using a different exit route. The jogger passed her again, this time on the footbridge where she was standing still, texting on her phone. The jogger said to her, "I see you found the bridge." But it was clear that Elaine was not in the mood for conversation, and she did not reply. Data showed what was said between her and Dwyer. Slave, here, now. Where's the park? Master, cross bridge, head for opposite end of park, near steps to sea. She texted him when she arrived at the spot, and he instructed her to go down to the shore and wait for him. To get down to the beach, she would have taken stairs. Then she had to cross a road and go down another stairway. Police were not able to find any witnesses who saw her on the beach, so concluded that Graham must have picked her up in his car when she reached the road at the bottom of the first steps. Together, they drove into the woods at Killakee, where he finally satisfied his lifelong fantasy of raping and stabbing a woman to death. Forensic psychologist John O'Keefe talked to journalist Nicola Tallant from Sunday World and described what must have gone through Graham Dwyer's mind at this stage. O'Keefe reckons that by the time a person is given in to their compulsion to kill, nothing will stop them. Graham was probably excited as he waited for Elaine, luring her deeper and deeper into the park. It was easy for him to remain calm after the killing. The event had been brewing in his fantasies for many years. Also, he was used to keeping his BDSM life a secret. It was a part of him that he could close the door to and walk away, as he had done many times before after sexual encounters. He hid it from his wife, and his middle-class suburban persona was the perfect disguise for the monster that was lurking beneath. Once he was done, he simply left her remains out in the open. Then he drove to another county and dumped the evidence in the reservoir. Then, he went home to his wife and children and resumed his everyday life. O'Keefe is convinced that Graham would have visited the spot where he had left Elaine in the year before she was discovered, to view his work, like an artist appreciating his craft. Professor David Wilson pointed out that Dwyer's was a case of piquerism, the sexual compulsion to penetrate the skin of another person with a sharp object. The sight and smell of blood would stimulate him sexually. Because Elaine said that she wasn't into blood anymore, quote-unquote, it is fair to assume he had stabbed her before. Because she had a history of self-harming, she could have explained her injuries as being self-inflicted. But for Graham, the fantasy had to evolve. If he had a knife in the bedroom, soon that would become mundane, normal. The knife had to move into the act of sex. Once that became routine, it had to be used for penetration deep enough to inflict serious harm, ideally, death. Both Graham's and Elaine's laptops contained footage of them engaging in violent sex. On his computer were short stories written by him about raping women at knife point. When police arrested Dwyer, he said that he didn't know Elaine O'Hara. He also denied that he ever owned the Nokia phone from which Master had sent his messages to Slave. But police had tons of evidence against him and presented the pieces to him, one after the other. Graham Dwyer was identified as the man seen entering Elaine's home on CCTV footage. His DNA profile matched the semen found in her bed. There were also puncture marks on the mattress made by a knife. When police showed him the sex videos with him and Elaine, he had to confess that he knew her. Graham said that he met her on a BDSM website and a relationship developed. But he didn't kill her. Then, when she disappeared, he thought that she had ended her own life. Despite all the evidence against him, he insisted that he was innocent and only tried to help Elaine. Police didn't buy it. Graham Dwyer was charged with murder. He requested bail, but it was denied as police were convinced he had an insatiable appetite and he would not hesitate to harm someone again. During his time in remand, Graham wrote many letters to his wife Gemma, promising her that he was innocent and that his arrest was a mistake. He admitted that he had tried to help Elaine, whom he referred to as that awful woman. Graham begged Gemma to forgive him for not telling her about Elaine. He was adamant that he did not kill her. But it was too late. Gemma was appalled when she learned of her husband's secret life. The fact that he had been lying to her and sleeping with other women, engaging in BDSM, was something she could not forgive. She left him and broke off all contact. Graham's trial started on the 22nd of January, 2015, and lasted for 10 weeks. The case attracted a lot of media attention, with tabloids loving the story of the wealthy architect and his double life. At the trial, one shocking revelation followed the other. Hours of sex videos showed that Dwyer was obsessed with knives and violence. In court, clips were shown of Dwyer stabbing Elaine in the stomach while having sex. Most of the videos were with Elaine, but she wasn't the only one. At the same time, he was involved with 4 other women too. In all the videos, he either threatened to stab or actually stabbed his sexual partners. Afterwards, he liked to film a close-up on the wounds, presumably so he could watch it over and over again, reliving his sexual gratification. Some of the videos were of himself in a bondage mask, stabbing himself. However, Dwyer did not actually inflict harm onto himself. That part was only an illusion. In court, the messages between Graham and Elaine were shown to the jury. Text messages from Elaine alluded to Dwyer's threats to stab and kill her. The years and years of emotional turmoil between master and slave became public knowledge. The whole country followed the story with a sense of disgust and disbelief. Dwyer's defense claimed that as pathologists were unable to determine Elaine's cause of death, it was not plausible to charge Graham with killing her. They presented evidence of Elaine considering suicide and outlined her history of mental illness. They contended that there was no stab injuries to the skeletal remains, which made the knifing footage irrelevant in a murder case. The defense claimed that the texts from Dwyer were only fantasy, not threats. It was part of the game, and Elaine was a willing participant. For the prosecution, Shanganagh SC argued that all the evidence pointed to Dwyer planning the murder in such a way that he had hoped to get away with it. Texts between the two showed that Dwyer was violent. But Elaine asked not to be stabbed or beaten. She only wanted love, companionship, and perhaps even a child. Dwyer was aware of her mental state and that she had visited a psychologist and had received treatment at St. Elstonbury. The timing of setting his plan in motion was no coincidence. He lured her to the cemetery. Then they went into the woods together. Dwyer's plan was to make it appear as if though Elaine had ended her own life. Psychology experts believed that Elaine would not be his last victim, and that Dwyer would kill again. He had met a woman from Maine called Darcy Day online, and they engaged in sexual fantasy conversations. Like Elaine, Darcy felt suicidal at times and had inflicted self-harm as a teenager. On Dwyer's computer, a short story called Killing Darcy was a violent narrative of a lustful killer who stabbed Darcy to death, then sodomized her corpse. Darcy became a born-again Christian and renounced her BDSM past, but when she was asked to testify in the Dwyer case, she agreed. The jury deliberated for 7 hours and returned a unanimous verdict. Graham Dwyer was found guilty on March 27, 2015, and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial judge said he agreed 110% with the jury's verdict. Elaine's family and friends sat through torturous hours of video evidence. The press loved the story because it seemed so unlikely that clean-cut Dwyer and a childcare worker like Elaine could have been into BDSM. Elaine's family pleaded with the public to remember Elaine for all her other qualities and not for her sexual preferences. There was so much more to her, and she would have been mortified at having her most intimate secrets made public. Sadly, she never had the chance to have her own family and children, something that she always wanted. The murder of Elaine O'Hara was almost a perfect crime. Had there not been a drought, William Fegan would probably never have found the evidence at Sandy's Bridge. If Garda James O'Donoghue didn't follow up and visit the reservoir, they would never have seen the evidence linking Elaine to her killer, Graham Dwyer. They were from different worlds. Graham was a seemingly wealthy and well-known architect. Elaine, a childcare worker who struggled to get by. She offered herself up to be loved. Instead, she was slaughtered, sacrificed to satisfy one disturbed man's darkest fantasies. If you'd like to read more about this case, have a look at the resources used for this episode in the show notes. If you like our podcast, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now. This was The Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.